So we're in the path of the Bodhisattva, or the path of altruism, and we've been talking about first the ethical position, which is basically the Bodhisattva vow that we wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then we looked briefly at the 6 perfections and focused on generosity, but that then in essence is the ethical position on top of and in combination with those that we looked at in terms of the path of individual liberation. And so building on top of that, and in terms of practices then, we looked at patience and persistence as a part of that, or joyful effort, and then meditation and wisdom. And so we used then as an additional practice the 4 immeasurables. The 4 immeasurables being loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. We normally teach equanimity first, and so we looked at equalizing self and others, and also exchanging self and others. And then we build upon that by doing the other practices. And so last time we did the loving kindness, or metta meditation, to focus on that real feeling of genuine love and radiating that out clear across all universes and time and space and so forth. And so that is a very helpful kind of a practice for us. So today we're going to look at the other 2 parts of the immeasurables. We're going to look at compassion and joy. And we will focus in terms of our practice on the one on compassion. Now, compassion is defined as the wish that all sentient beings not have suffering and the causes of suffering. In contrast with loving kindness, if you look at it as drawing a line, loving kindness is the wish that they have happiness and the causes of happiness. So that's kind of above the line. And its companion is compassion, the wish that we not have suffering and the causes of suffering. So that's below the line, if you will. Kind of like the front and the back of your hand is another way to think of it. They're very much integrated with each other, just a different way of saying the same thing. And so what we're talking about here in terms of compassion is a practice called Tonglen. Tonglen means giving and taking. And so the idea is we do this, and it's actually in combination with loving kindness, and so we'll see how out of our compassion we also express loving kindness towards others in this practice. And so like before, we do this practice 2-3 times a day. If you can do that, that's great, or once a day for a longer period of time. And we begin by setting our intention, just as we have been doing, whether to do the practice for the benefit of all sentient beings, which is basically the Bodhisattva ideal, or another specific personal intention that we might have. And then we say refuge, the refuge prayer 3 times. Settle our body into the stillness of body, speech, and mind. Take a couple of breaths, relax, get our back straight, comfortable but relaxed. And then we begin by, first of all, thinking of somebody that we know who is experiencing or has recently experienced some form of suffering. And there are many forms of suffering, as we've talked about previously. For example, we talk about things such as illness, aging, and dying, some of the early teachings of the Buddha, or the 3 sufferings that he talks about, the suffering of suffering, which is basically pain and physical pain and mental anguish, kind of the normal things that that word conjures up for us. And also the suffering of change. We get things that we don't want, or things don't happen that we do want. And I keep saying that the newspaper continues to get wrong the lottery numbers. I don't know what it is, but the lottery numbers just never quite come out right. So the suffering of not getting something that I do want, in a way. I could do many good things with the money from the lottery, I'm sure. And so those kinds of issues are a part of that, a kind of suffering. And the third of the 3 sufferings is all-pervasive suffering, which relates to samsara and just the general sense of imperfection in the way things are. We're always trying to find ways to make things better. And whether it's doing a Buddhist practice, such as we're engaged in here, or whether it's this huge self-help industry that's out there in our culture or whatever, or even if it's altruistic behavior, doing things for other people, people that are suffering, whether it's a hurricane that somebody has experienced, or an earthquake, or some other catastrophe, if it's people who are suffering because of war. We are often very generous in the ways that we go about helping people out of the compassion, out of the feeling that we have for them in that shared experience, because we are all indeed one big family of sentient beings together. And that includes not just humans, but other forms as well. And so we identify here someone that we know, recognize, has had some sense of suffering, and we begin by putting ourselves in their place. We talked about exchanging self and other previously, so it's that type of an experience. Try to put yourself in their place and really feel the suffering that they are feeling as you perceive that. And get to know that feeling. And then at the same time, you know that they don't want that suffering. They just want it to go away. So you begin to connect with that. And then the actual practice, once we've connected strongly with the feeling, is that we imagine that suffering visually as a thick black cloud that's inside their mind. And then we breathe in. And as we breathe in, that thick cloud of black smoke comes in through our nose and goes down to our heart, where it's instantly transformed into a white, warm light. And then as we breathe out, that white warm light comes up and goes out and radiates back out to them and helps then alleviate, transform their suffering. And then we just continue that practice, just breathing in this black cloud of smoke. It transforms. We breathe out a nice warm white light to transform them in their suffering. And so as we breathe in, we breathe out, we can continue that until we get to a point where we feel like, in fact, their suffering has been alleviated. Okay? So that's the basic practice. Now, Pema Chodron, when she teaches this, also says, well, if a warm white light doesn't quite seem appropriate, imagine that you're giving them a nice cup of hot coffee or a flower or something else. So it doesn't have to be limited in how we go about doing that. She's also answered questions. I remember one of the teachings that she gave, somebody said, well, you keep taking in this dark black soot into your heart. Isn't that going to hurt you at some point? Well, remember, it instantly transforms when it gets to your heart. So it's not there anymore. It's not like it's accumulating in your heart. No, in fact, it's transformed into this wonderful stuff that then goes out and benefits the other party. That's the object of our focus here in this practice. So we imagine getting this pure, warm, white light as we breathe it out, and in the form of loving kindness that we have as we express that for them. And we repeat this just over and over again. And as we do this as a practice, if you want and you have the time, you can then think of another sentient being, someone else you know, who has maybe a different kind of suffering. It's very good in terms of training our mind to repeat a practice over and over, but also vary it somewhat. And so one of the variances can be a different person with a different kind of suffering. And that helps keep our mind interested in the process. If we repeat things in exactly the same way every time, a lot of times what happens is the mind starts getting a little bored and it starts looking for diversions and it can get very distracted. So if you can vary the practice just a little bit, that can also be very helpful as a way of training our mind. And then, of course, we dedicate the merit. And then in terms of the post-meditation practice, we go about looking for other opportunities to do this. As we live our lives and we go about venturing from place to place, we'll see people who are suffering. Of course, it's very easy. They're all over the place. And so we look for these opportunities to just do a shorthand version of this practice and breathe it in, even if you only have a chance to do it one breath in, and then send out the loving kindness on the out breath, that's fine. That's enough. But you look for as many opportunities as you can find as you go about doing this. And of course, as always, we will also maintain our mindfulness of body, speech, and mind as we go about our activities throughout the day and night, as far as that goes. So that's the essence of this practice. So the last of the four immeasurables then is joy, or some people say sympathetic joy. And there are two forms of this. The first one is the kind of sense of joy that we have in sympathy for someone else who is experiencing something good or beneficial. And so it might be somebody who graduated from school, or somebody who got a new job, or a promotion for a job, or it could be someone who won the big ball game, or it could be most any kind of success that someone has had as a form of joy that we might feel for them. You know, Bill Clinton famously said, "I feel your pain." This is kind of the inverse of that. I feel your joy. So that's the first kind. But we're not jealous, we're not envious of their success. We're just feeling a sense of joy about their success itself. The second type has to do with enlightenment. Now in this path, the path of the Bodhisattva, part of what we're all about here is attaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so here you could think of it as the wish that all sentient beings attain enlightenment. So what you're looking at is the joy of enlightenment. So you're wishing that everyone would experience this sense of joy at having achieved enlightenment. And so you can do this practice starting with one and then moving to the other, which is a good way to do it. One kind of builds on the other in that way. Or you can do it as two separate versions as well. You just do one, and then at a different time you could do the other form of this. And it follows the same pattern that we've been looking at, that we begin by setting our intention, and then we take refuge 3 times, and then we begin by settling ourselves, take a couple deep breaths, you have your back straight and so forth. And then you think of someone you know who's experienced some form of success in this case. And so then you try to feel very good for them and reflect on their happiness, as well as feeling your own sympathy for their experience. And then you let that feeling grow until it gets stronger and stronger, so you really have a very solid feeling about what they are experiencing as a result of that. And then you go about feeling that joy. You just resonate with that joy for them. And then you find another case. In this one, you're looking for an example of someone where they experienced this kind of success, but maybe you weren't quite as sympathetic in their joy. Maybe there's just a little twinge of jealousy or envy in the process. And then you go through the same kind of experience of trying to really get in connection with that, and then transform that into more of a pure form of sympathetic joy for them, even though originally you didn't have that feeling for them. And then in a third case, we could finish up with somebody where we really were kind of jealous at their success. And so then we just continue working on that until we transform that into a real sense of sympathetic joy for what it is that they have accomplished, their success, whatever it was that helped them feel good in an ordinary sense of the word. And then once we've done that, assuming now that we're doing both parts of this, we switch our focus here to the idea of feeling joy for all sentient beings attaining enlightenment. And so as we do this, we imagine them in a state of peace and happiness, and they're going about helping others as well to also achieve enlightenment. And then we continue to contemplate each of the people, the three people in this case that we imagined in the first example. So if we're putting both of them together, we keep those three people in mind. And then we go about imagining each of them achieving enlightenment and feeling a sense of joy. We imagine them helping others also to achieve enlightenment and so forth. And then once we get to a point where we just have confidence in this feeling, then we go ahead and conclude by just resting in the natural state, just kind of let go and let be, and that helps secure that feeling that we've had in the process of doing this practice. And of course then we conclude by dedicating the merit. And then as a post-meditation practice, we again look for opportunities to do this same kind of a practice as we go about doing things throughout our day. And so if we see somebody who's experienced some success, it could be something that we see on television. It could be someone that we know personally. It could be any variety of things that happen. And instantly you think about the joy that you feel for their success. Or if there is a little bit of a twinge of jealousy or envy, you think about that as well and go about transforming that into a sympathetic joy for that individual. And so that in essence is the practice here. So we've covered the four immeasurables. We've developed a little practice for each. They follow fairly much the same pattern, although there are some variances in there. So we've looked at equanimity in terms of the order of the practice as the first one. We looked at loving kindness. We looked at compassion. And now we've just looked at a practice related to joy. So these also are very important parts of the practice of the path of the Bodhisattva. So we've reviewed a number of different practices that we can include, and we also include as a part of this, when we look at the 6 perfections of meditation, we looked at several of these that can be forms of that meditation, but the shamatha from the path of individual liberation as well. We continue to do that shamatha practice, whether we do it at the end of each of these practices as we looked at these, or we do it as a separate practice. We continue to reinforce that focus, that single-pointed, calm, abiding focus as a part of our meditation practice. And so next time then we will conclude this path, the path of the Bodhisattva, or the path of altruism, by looking at the wisdom part of this practice. Looking at the Buddha nature, looking at the prajnaparamita, the perfections, perfection of wisdom practices, and then also the middle way practices that are associated with the wisdom aspect of the path of the Bodhisattva. So that will be next time.